Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special episode of the Project Infinite podcast, the podcast covering the infinite and ever-expanding multiverse of fandom for movies, comics, TV shows, and video games. We got you covered. I'm Rob. I'm here with Court. Court, we're here to talk about Thor, Love and Thunder.
And boy, was there love and was there thunder.
There was lots of both.
That's it.
Movie.
That's
it. That's the whole movie.
That's the review.
Yeah, so this is going to be like a quick kind of 20 to 30 minute non-spoiler review of the movie, just so we can share our thoughts with you and let you know what we thought of the movie. That being said, what did you think of the movie?
I thought it was a solid movie. It's probably, I mean, we can get into phase 4 ranking of these movies at the end, but at this point, I thought it was a solid entry, performance-wise, because that's basically what we can talk about for a non-spoiler review. I mean, Christian Bale is Christian Bale. He was probably the best part about this movie. He's menacing. He's cynical. Anytime he gets onto a screen, it just demands excellence. So I think he did bring his A game for something I never thought he would do in his entire lifetime. Some of the references as well too are just some crazy stuff that was going on in this movie. So really did enjoy it. Like I said, probably not my favorite of these Phase 4 movies, but I think it lands in the middle of the pack because I believe this is the 6th Phase 4 movie that's come out, I believe, which is crazy to think about. Yeah, and that's on top of 5 shows. So Marvel's really, the train's moving full steam ahead. Chris Hemsworth is, I mean, admittedly so. He's having a ball. You can just tell he's having a lot of fun. No spoilers, but his kids are in this movie, his actual real life kids. So you could tell they're all having a lot of fun. I think all of the main characters' kids were in this movie. Yeah. So yeah, you feel a lot of fun. You feel a lot of enjoyment. It's just an enjoyable summer movie.
Yeah, I agree. I really like this movie a lot. Probably a little bit more than you did, but that's part of it. I think what this movie comes down to, without spoiling anything, is this movie, whether or not you enjoy it, is really going to hinge upon 2 things. It's going to hinge upon whether or not you like the direction that this character has taken from Ragnarok. And if you didn't like that, you're gonna dislike this movie even more than you disliked Ragnarok.
I agree.
If you like the direction that it was taking in Ragnarok, you still might not like this movie as much because it takes the things that Ragnarok did in respects to the humor and dials it up to probably like 11 or 12.
Right.
And that's not for everybody, which is fine. But I just want to say 2 things. Definitively. You can have your opinions.
Yeah, you're taking my spot this week because I usually do this, but go off.
You can have your opinions, but there's 2 opinions that you're not allowed to have. One of which is Thor 1 is better than this movie, and the other opinion is that Thor 2 is better than this movie. None of those things are true.
Yeah, so Thor 1, I just, maybe, and I'm saying the biggest of maybes, if you are to enjoy this movie more, not like if the movie's better, because it's just not. Thor 2, however, if you genuinely think Thor 2 is better than this movie, come on. You don't need to lie to yourself. It's not.
Again, without spoiling anything, this movie has one of the stronger third acts that we've seen in a MCU solo film that I can remember. It's tough to do this without spoiling, but there's a tonal shift that takes place between Act 2 and Act 3 that really accelerates this movie in a pretty insane way that I don't think you'd be ready for based on... There's a lot, honestly, that the trailers don't give you from what this movie actually gives you. Again, not spoiling anything, but if the tone of the trailer is not the tone of the entire film. It's a tone for like probably the first half of the film. Right. And then the second half takes a pretty crazy turn in respects to, the Gore character really takes the second half of the movie by the throat. And he's not in it a ton.
No, especially in the first half. He's barely in the first half of the movie.
Which is a justifiable kind of complaint, I think. Yeah. That a lot of his god butchering happens off screen.
Right. And no, like you said, like a lot of his strength, a lot of his powers kind of, it's supposed to be sort of like an aura type of thing and like this like myth. And this was something I was thinking about just for Thor and Gore itself. I mean, lore wise, like where they're coming from, Gore and Thor are they are contemporaries. In my opinion, that is Thor's greatest adversary. I know I should say it's Loki, and it should probably be, but if there was, for me, it's more of a 1A, 1B than Loki definitively being his number 1, because Gore's his whole methodology and his entire motivation is built upon the fact that beings like Thor should all be killed because they will never do anything for people like him. And it is really like eye-opening to look at, and the way the movie presents it, I think it's pretty well done. You kind of see the argument that Gore's having, like, that I will never be saved. Like, they don't really care about people like us. Like, we're just lower level beings that just exist on these planets, and like, however much praying to these gods that we'll do, that some of them will never come to save us. And no, you really get an emotional performance from Christian Bale first when you see him, and then at the very end of the movie. Yeah, he really kind of shines. But on the physical aspect, I mean, I did enjoy the fight sequences in this movie as well. I do think they were pretty well done. I think it's a good example of showing power too, like just how powerful Thor was. And again, to go back to Thor 1, Thor was powerful, but he was like, hand to hand, he was just kind of like, he felt normal. It's right up until Avengers 1. Now it's feeling like the hits he dishes out feels like a Thor type of character, and I really enjoy that at this point.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of clashing of axes and swords, and every time those things happen, there's like these like anime shockwaves.
Right, yeah.
whenever that happens, that really does a good job of demonstrating the type of power scale.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Another character that I obviously wanted to take interest in here was that of Jane Foster.
Right.
So Natalie Portman returning, obviously, after not being in these films since Thor 2, with a little bit of coming back in Avengers Endgame, with
right,
archival stuff. But now she's back, and I said this to you when we left the theater, that character is the heart of this movie. The plot, as much as it is about Gore, hunting gods, and Thor obviously stopping him. That's the good guy, bad guy conflict.
Right.
But the heart of this movie really runs through the Jane Foster character.
Yeah.
Again, can't spoil anything as far as where her story goes beyond what's shown in the trailer, but it's really, really good. She's obviously the best that she's been as that character. She seems way more comfortable.
Right.
In this iteration.
She gets new purpose, in my opinion. I think it's like it's refound, and essentially what happened for Chris Hemsworth himself in Thor Ragnarok. Yeah. She finally gets new purpose. Like, she was a character that really didn't mean anything to any Thor narrative past Thor: The Dark World. And I mean, if you want to get into the Avengers Endgame part of it, we can, but I just, in terms of like emotional involvement and like actual investment in narrative, like, cool, she was there in Endgame just so they can get the ether out, but nothing would have changed. Like, this changes her character and her path, and it's the most compelling she's ever been by far.
Yeah, she's great.
She is, yeah.
She does a great job of portraying Jane as a hero.
Yeah, you know what she kind of, I don't know why I was getting these kind of feelings, but like, of how Miss Marvel kind of operates, like, how to understand, like, because I talked about with you a little bit before how the world finally feels lived in. Like, the MCU, like, this is by far the most lived in it's felt like. I mean, down to like places in New Asgard being like tourist attractions with like infinity cones. Like, it's like, it is a very lived in place. So like, in her mind, she's just like, I need a catchphrase. Like, that's a running joke throughout I need to be a hero. Like,
it's very Miss Marvel.
Right, like, I enjoy that. Like, if these people, like, and essentially the new Avengers are forming, and we talked about a little bit with the Disney Cruise stuff that happened last week, but she does feel like, I need to, like, I've gotten these powers, like, I need to use them for good. Like, this is how some people would operate in the MCU. Like, there was a new version of, like, we've seen it with Kate Bishop. We're probably going to see it with with Elijah Bradley in the new Avengers. Like, we've seen it with so many characters. Miss Marvel's probably Exhibit A right now. This is how they're going to start to live. Like, they're going to want to be heroes, and Jane Foster, with the power of Thor, could have just said, well, now my life's saved. But now she's like, I need to help people. It's just kind of in my innate DNA. So I really enjoy that.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it, that she, this isn't a spoiler to say that, they meet and Thor's like, how is this happening? And
right.
Valkyrie kind of explains to him, like, she's good at saving people, but it's everything else
right.
that she needs work on.
Right, and I mean, I can get into something that I wasn't loving about this movie, and that's specifically the first half. The first half of the movie isn't great, and I think it might be a little different from being you. One thing I think that the first half doesn't do is there's so much information that's not told to us in the first half of the movie. It's just, it's a lot of stuff that happens off screen that you're just supposed to assume about. And that's a perfect point. Like, the stuff with Valkyrie, like, how did she even get to the point? Like, I talked about her being a hero, but how did she even get to the point of being in Asgard to fight anybody? Because she, at the point where
people recognize her,
and she's like a legend essentially there at this point. It's just, it was a really, because there's no time jump. It's just, it's like days or like a day. Like, it's not like a year has passed. So it is a very interesting approach that they took. And like I said, the first half of this movie is it's the weakest half. It's probably one of the weaker.
It's a pretty rapidly paced film.
Yeah,
it's only 2 hours.
2 hours, right? It's like these films are feeling like, you know, shots of, you know, injections of Marvel lore into the universe. So yeah.
I agree. I think part of that, and we talked about this, was the beginning, Guardians of the Galaxy stuff, which is in the trailer, so we can talk about that a little bit. You know, we were right on the money with what we thought the Guardians' involvement was going to be in this movie, as like the first, you know, 20 minutes or so, kind of setting the stage. But in a 2-hour movie, I'm not sure that's time that you can afford to take.
Yeah, yep, and, I agree. Yep.
I mean, I don't blame Taika Waititi for that.
No.
Because it was what had to happen. Because he leaves Avengers Endgame with the Guardians of the Galaxy, segueing into a Thor film. So now your first thing that you have to do, no matter what story you want to write for this Thor movie, is you have to get Thor away from the Guardians.
Right.
So, and you can't do that in 5-10 minutes, you know, of a movie. You know, you have to make a kind of drawn out sequence of scenes to get that separation going and get the plot going. And in a 2-hour movie, like, could you have taken those 20 minutes and devoted them more to developing what Jane Foster is up to?
Right.
Probably.
Yeah.
And you probably get a little bit better of a first half of a movie, you know, if you're allowed to do that.
Yeah, it just, the movie doesn't feel as rounded out in the first half. And again, that goes to the Guardians feeling a little flat. They feel like caricatures of themselves versus the actual Guardians of the Galaxy. And I mean, I probably won't not like that as much by the time Guardians 3 gets here, because I think you need to save that, because what might happen, it might be like it's not going to be this drastic, but it might be a Boba Fett situation where it's like the Mandalorian completely just took over the plot and that's what everybody cared about. Like, they did keep them sidelined to the point of like, Thor by far is the most powerful of you, and like, he essentially in the first, like, not to talk about the first part, but like, he comes in and lets it known that he's the Thunder God. Like, that, there's a reason why they're the Guardians, but he's Thor. Like, he's the one that saved the day in Wakanda. He's the one that killed Thanos. Like, there's a reason why he's where he is and they're where they are. But all their like emotional beats are going to be saved for their own movie. Yeah. But again,
we talked about that.
Right.
They don't feel like the Guardians.
Right.
And you know, again, it's not anybody's fault. I don't think it's Taika Waititi's fault. It's just, I don't think anybody understands those characters as well as James Gunn does. And secondly, you know, not for nothing, but the actors who play the Guardians know that they're not going to be in this Thor movie for very long.
Right.
They're not going to put their full Guardianness into this Thor movie. They're going to show up, they're going to deliver some lines, and they're going to leave because it's not their movie. So yeah, the Guardians bit, I know a lot of people were probably excited for some Thor and Guardians adventures.
Right.
You don't get that.
No, this is a Thor story. This isn't a Guardians and Thor team up. This is specifically a Thor story, and they kind of dispatched the Guardians and set them on their way to be the and that's something I will say is the saving grace of that. They get them on the path to be the Guardians of the Galaxy, and that's something even Thor goes as far to address the fact that, like, you are the Guardians of the Galaxy, you need to go be such.
Yeah, you don't need to deal with my problems.
Right, yeah. Even though maybe I want to talk about them.
Even though it's handled in a, you know, again, it's whether the comedy works for you or not is really going to dictate most of your enjoyment of this movie. I don't think there's much of a question of how great the second half is. I think it's just that first half that's going to weigh heavily for a lot of people. You know, like I said, it's Ragnarok dialed up to 11, 12. It's very snappy. There's a lot of visual gags. There's one particular gag that persists throughout the movie.
Right.
That will probably be very grating to some people.
Right.
You know, but all in all, I really liked it. I don't know. I can't, you know, I don't think it's not the best MCU movie, but it felt very Phase 1-y.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little before, even going more over this Phase 1-esque way of approaching. Yes, that is how they're approaching Phase 4. This is the new phase. This is all these new heroes, just as your Iron Mans and your Captain Americas and your Thors were being introduced. Now we're having these new characters, your Moon Knights, your Miss Marvels, like now they're being introduced, your Shang-Chi's, your Eternals. Like this is what the new phase is gonna look like. This is the beginning of what this, if we'll call it the Secret War of adventure, is going to be. We're in it right now. We're not going to get definitive answers to everything right this second. I think that's something that people aren't loving as well. They want, because we've been, we'll talk about it more when we get to the spoiler review, but it's kind of this Marvel went on an absolutely insane run from 2016 to 2021. Like it was just an absolutely nuts run of just box office hits and just world phenomenon, because it went to Civil War to Black Panther to Infinity War to Endgame, and then we had the decompress, and then it went right back up for Spider-Man No Way Home.
And I don't think that's an accident either, because if you want to look at these 20-some-odd Marvel Studios movies, even the movies themselves kind of fulfill a story, a kind of crescendo and an arc, right? So by the time you do get, the early movies from probably 2008 to 2015, 13 probably 2008 to 2013, you're doing like your rising action, right? Like all those movies are building upon one another to get to the climax, and then the climax is probably Civil War is probably the climax, and then like you said, now we got to Civil War, now we have to build up to Infinity War. We have to, so everything after Civil War has to hit, basically, because you're building to this pretty crazy thing. And by the time you get to Endgame, now you're falling down the other side of that. So you get, Black Widow. You get, kind of like your post-mortem. You get Spider-Man No Way Home, even though that did reach some pretty crazy, insane heights. That was built upon what that movie contained, not necessarily the story itself. Like the story itself is an origin story,
It's the finishing. Like people always want to say, like the Spider-Man trilogy in the MCU, they have their grievances against it, and I said you need to put all those movies together as one arc for him, instead of just the first movie being the origin, and then the second one's the fall. This was supposed to be the Spider-Man from our universe saw these other Spider-Man, coupled with everything he had seen from the last X amount of years, and he was the Spider-Man that lived through the snap as well, or not lived through, but like he had to experience what happened from this this universe shattering event. Like all that led up to, and I always say it, the epilogue to that movie is probably one of my favorites in these MCU movies, but it's its own large arc that kind of compiled into that situation.
So even though that movie reached insane levels of hype and it felt like an Infinity War Endgame-esque movie, it really serves as a launch point for where Spider-Man is going to go from here on out.
It's more classic Spider-Man now,
Yeah. It just doesn't feel that way because of the way that it was the way it was done. It felt like a culmination rather than an origin, but it is an origin. So you got that. You have Shang-Chi, which obviously is an origin story. You have the Eternals, which is an origin story. You have all the Disney Plus shows that serves as origin stories. You have Doctor Strange is the first one that felt like kind of a true sequel to something. And then you have this, which is a sequel, obviously, carrying on, furthering the legacy of the Thor character, but also serving as an origin story for a bunch of other stuff. Which, again, that's why I say this movie felt pretty Phase 1-esque, because not just in terms of that, but also in terms of the plot. The plot itself is relatively simple.
No, it's not an overly complicated plot. I thought it was going to be. I thought they were going to try to pull a whole bunch of stuff from different pieces of, Marvel Comics, which they did, and we'll save that for the spoiler review, because this, if Moon Knight and what else did we get? And Shang-Chi were kind of, a little bit more calm. And I don't even love to use that for Shang-Chi, because I actually just watched that yesterday, and it is a pretty... The plot is still pretty simplistic, but the lore they pull from this movie is very, very simple, and like in terms of like the straight narrative for Thor and Jane Foster, it doesn't feel overly complicated. It's a nice shot, like straight shot to the end. So, but it's the first half. It's the first half that kind of dwindles that down. But once you hit, we have to save it. But once you hit that tone shift in the second half, it takes off.
Yeah, it's pretty. I talked about this as being maybe my favorite part of the movie. That it's a physical and a figurative tone shift that is impossible to miss, because you do get, there's so many visual cues that lets the viewer know, like, okay, this was fun and jokey for a little while, but now things are about to get really real, and it gets super real, which is you know, for a franchise, not just the Thor franchise, but the MCU in general, we talk about they don't always land their finales. You know, whether you're looking at the TV shows, whether you're looking at their third acts in their movies, they don't always hit, you know. But I thought this hit. This was the rare Marvel movie where, like, the first bit is the part that didn't really resonate, and then the second half was what really stuck.
You know what's funny? I'm thinking about the Phase 3 movies. Or, sorry, the Phase 4 movies. Do these not have some of my... I feel like these have some of my favorite third acts.
Yeah, I agree.
The Shang-Chi third act, I think, is pretty well done. The Shang-Chi third act, what's really well done about it is the relationship between him and his father. Kind of, it plays really well once you get into the third act. And it's like, his ascension to, like, a hero is probably one of my favorites in the entire MCU. He has, like, it's kind of like the music coupled with, like, him finally acquiring the 10 rings. It's like, it's such this, like, showcase of, like, a hero. What else do we have? We have the Black Widow third act. Black Widow third act, I talked about it. It's probably it might be, for me personally, the weakest, but I don't even think it's necessarily bad. I just think it does turn into, like, the CGI fest at the last. Not that the other movies didn't, but it probably had me the least invested. It might be a villain-based thing too.
It's a villain-based thing. It's also just the timing-based thing
right,
that we talked about.
Right, that movie.
Like, that movie just came out at the worst possible time.
Yeah, the only saving grace for that is the fact that we wouldn't have gotten Florence Pugh as Yelena Belova if that movie had come out when it was supposed to. So I'll give them that. But I mean, I personally think the Eternals third act is underrated. That's an underrated third act for me. I think it is really like an emotional gut punch, and the action in the third act is pretty well done. Man, I'll get to it one day, but I really like that movie.
Yeah,
it's one of my more favorite MCU movies.
Yeah, I mean, the Spider-Man No Way Home.
Yeah, that's just
third act is incredible.
Yeah,
and then
Doctor Strange. Yeah, shout out Sam Raimi. He directed the absolute heck out of that movie.
And that's what this is too.
Yeah.
You know, going back to this. If we're getting, it seems, I mean, Taika obviously has his fingerprints all over Ragnarok, and that was really kind of the first true example of a director kind of having real free reins with a MCU.
That you can tell, because, like, oh no, yeah.
Well, James Gunn, I guess, Guardians. Yeah.
No, I'd probably take Black Panther before that.
Okay.
Yeah, that you can kind of feel a director in something. But I think, like, because it still was, Black Panther was still a pretty serious movie. Like, Thor Ragnarok is a comedy. Like, that is straight up and so is this one's a romantic comedy, and Thor Ragnarok's a comedy. It's like an adventure comedy.
Yeah, adventure comedy. Probably the best way to put that. But yeah, we said this before we even saw this, that it was going to be a rom-com-esque. There's even, you know, without spoiling it, there is like a romantic comedy kind of montage in this movie. But, what else do I want to talk about? I mean, Korg and Valkyrie are back. Korg is, you know, the same one-liner, quippy.
Korg is Korg. Another thing that I didn't love is Valkyrie was not as much as I think she could have been. And it does feel a little disappointing that they didn't sideline Tessa Thompson, but she definitely, I feel like she's only there to do the thing that we can't talk about to the spoiler review. Like, that's the only reason I feel like she's there, instead of being the actual king of Asgard. Like, if you played that a little bit more, and like, because they talked about it a little bit at the end of Endgame, but that was like the last we ever heard of it. Like, I probably would want to hear a little bit more about like how she's the king, but Thor, because there is a part where Thor does land in New Asgard, and it's like, people listen to him when he comes to New Asgard. Like, they vehemently like are worshiping him, which plays into the narrative of the whole movie a little bit, if you want to look at it that way. But yeah, I wish they would have done a little bit more with her. Too. And I think it's the first half not feeling like, it just feels like there's chunks missing from the first half that were cut. Yeah, that she probably wasn't doing more, but yeah,
I agree. I think the first half is pretty disjointed and not directionless, because it is building into things, but there's a certain number of kind of meandering things that are happening as we're getting from like important part to important part. Like things just seem like they're happening.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's, you know, if you're going to this movie looking to see some confrontations between Thor and Gore, there's a bunch of those.
Yeah.
They cross paths quite a bit in this movie, maybe even more than I expected them to.
Yeah. Especially in like in the first part of the beginning of the end of the first act, there is like they do see each other.
Yeah.
And again, I think for like the comic fans, they might not love this as much too. Like that's another sect of people I don't think are gonna love this as much. Is because how like dark the God Butcher comics were. Like once Jason Aaron, and I think again, if you want to talk about getting more specific, like Assad Ribick's art that he was doing, I know you've probably seen it from like the gore, like the 20, like it is like his is specifically like darker in tone. His, because I mean he drew Secret Wars, like the New Age Secret Wars, like it's a dark story that's being told. Like I feel like this being so vastly like a comedy versus like that's like a dark like adventure saga. It's like it is kind of, they kind of do clash a little bit.
Yeah, it's jarring.
Yeah,
it's really the first. I'm trying to think, it's probably the first instance of this where the tone of the comic is so vastly contrasted with the tone of the movie that is adapting it. Like there's really nothing. I mean, I guess Ragnarok also is kind of like that, but this even more so than that. Like there's such a stark contrast between the film and the source material that's really interesting.
Right.
But they were never gonna get a different director.
No, like you would have had to get like somebody that just deals in like just sorrow if you wanted to do this like specifically as if the comic was, because like just some of the deaths that some of the blows he's dishing out, like it's tough. It's like it's one of my favorite reads, but it is pretty tough read. So it's not a tough read, but it's like
they were never gonna. It would have been such a snappy, like it would have been such a crazy decision if they were like, we need a different director to more accurately do reflect the tone of the comic.
Right.
You can't do that.
No.
You can't do that to people. Like you can't go from the tone of Thor: The Dark World to the tone of Thor Ragnarok.
And then like back to like where Dark World and Thor 1 were.
Yeah, that's too much.
Right.
It's too much for people. You had to keep Taika Waititi on. And like I said, the movie is good. Like he does, a great job. And it's not like this is a guy who's unfamiliar with dealing with sensitive or hard topics. I mean, you talk about JoJo.
Right. Right, we had a really nice conversation about that, yeah.
So it's not like, and the second half of the movie is super emotional and super, dark, and he handles it wonderfully.
Yeah.
So it's not that. I think it's just, he indulged. He got probably a bit more kind of freedom to do stuff he wanted to do. He wanted to do fun, wacky stuff, and he did fun, wacky stuff. And whether or not that's your thing is going to dictate how you feel about this movie at the end of the day. That's really all it comes down to.
Right.
I don't think it does any disservice to the character of Thor. Like I've seen that take quite a bit.
And I told you this probably has one of my like epilogue, not like the ending, like the epilogue itself, like the end, the post the fallout. It probably has one of my more favorite aspects of that. It was just something about I called something, and I'll wait till later, that I had a feeling that was going to happen, and it happened, and it's just like the payoff feels really. I will say probably my favorite thing about Chris Hemsworth as Thor itself is this feels like a very natural progression of what he got at the end of this, and like whatever his future looks like.
Yeah, I agree. Anything else that you wanted to hit?
No, I mean, we kind of talked about anything. I think the last thing we could probably talk about is Zeus itself and kind of that portion of the movie. Russell Crowe, I guarantee you, he walked on set and he was just like, I'm just going to do whatever I want.
I'm going to make some choices.
Yeah, I'm going to make some choices, and choices he made. Yeah, no, he worked. And like, I don't think people are going to like that, but I said Zeus himself, that's probably way more accurate of a version of Zeus that we're going to get in any type of media than what was portrayed beforehand.
Yeah, we got him in Justice League a bit. We got some Zeus.
Yeah.
And he, I think that's what people kind of expect.
No. Yep.
No, think, I said it even when the look was revealed. I said, think, when you watch Game of Thrones, think of Robert Baratheon.
Yeah.
Think of the king who has been king for a long time. Kind of like
also Baron Harkonnen from Dune as well. Like that's the kind of Zeus that it's gonna be. Yeah. He's an old, not angry, but he's an old man.
He's just
that passes prime.
Into his life,
right?
As king of the gods,
a complacent king, even more so.
Which is what Zeus basically is. He's the king of the gods.
Right.
He's the god of gods. And when you have that much power, like, no one's a threat to him.
Right.
And so he doesn't have to be, big, and, he doesn't have to look like Thor.
Right.
Basically, he doesn't have to do that anymore because there's no one to challenge him.
Right.
And Russell Crowe plays that magnificently.
No, it's great. It's great.
It's a king who has rested on his laurels for he's a god, so presumably thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
So I liked it. I liked him a lot.
Me too.
And that's really, I think, all the kind of major characters.
Yeah, that we've gotten. We get the return of I think 3 characters, but we'll save that for the spoiler review. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Although I really liked it. I've seen it twice at this point, so I think the second viewing really helps digest that first bit a bit better.
Yeah, I've only seen it once, so
yeah. Now that knowing what you're in for, it kind of helps digest it a little bit more. Because it is very alarming. Like, it's very jarring first, probably, like, hour. You're like, is it
wow, yeah.
it's just this the whole time?
Right.
Like, I don't know if I can
handle this, yeah.
Because it is very quick. It's very snappy, but it settles in pretty quick once you get... Again, we'll talk about... Because I think the movie really, really hinges on this tonal shift that we keep alluding to. So we'll probably talk about that heaps when we get into our spoiler review. So this will be out as soon as I can finish editing it.
Right.
And then our regular Thor, Love and Thunder, full spoiler thing where we break down everything from the story bits that we can't talk about to the post-credits to the implications on the larger MCU, which is always the
fun
that people want to talk about the most. But as just a fun solo Thor adventure, this worked for me.
It worked for you. Yeah, like we talked about, it's probably middle of the pack in terms of these new Phase 4 movies. I didn't love this movie. I thought I didn't as much. But again, Christian Bale works in droves for me. He is exceptional in this movie. Chris Hemsworth is Chris Hemsworth. Like, he's just having fun, and I don't think that's said enough. And I think people just want to critically acclaim these a little bit more than they need to. The fact that he's having fun is enough for me. Yeah. Natalie Portman as well. She just breathed a little bit. It's funny to say she breathed new life into the thing that breathed new life into the MCU, but she did, in my opinion. But there is things that didn't work. But again, this is just supposed to be enjoyed. This is just supposed to be. It's the middle of the summer, right? It's the beginning of July. Go with your friends and your family. Have a good time. Eat some popcorn. Get the tin.
Get the tin.
Get the tin. Get the cup.
Spend your hard-earned dollars. See this.
Yeah. See this. Yeah.
And just enjoy it.
Yeah.
It is. The title is perfect. Love and Thunder.
Yeah.
That's what this is.
Yeah. Where are you ranking this in your Phase 4 movies?
Probably about. Man, I really like a lot of these. I think I would probably have it 4th.
4th?
Yeah. Yeah, behind No Way Home, behind Multiverse of Madness, behind Shang-Chi, I think is where I would have it.
You ready for my Phase 4 ranking at this point? Because it's going to be a little controversial. I thought about this yesterday. Shang-Chi's my favorite Phase 4 movie. And then it's probably Shang-Chi, then Spider-Man No Way Home. This is where it gets crazy. Eternals is my 3rd favorite movie. I'd probably have to put Doctor Strange, and then Thor, and then Black Widow. I think that's where my ranking lies. I think it's still it's still better than Black Widow, but Doctor Strange, it's just the director. It is still 2 movies that directors made choices on them for themselves, and you can feel it. But I felt like I was a little bit more connected to Sam Raimi's choices over this. But not to say that Taika didn't do a good job. I think personally he did, versus everybody else in the world feels like he didn't and needs to be fired, which is a little bit of an exaggeration. But yeah, go see this movie.
He's one of the best.
Yeah.
There's no, you look at his filmography and it's just spectacular
Yeah.
thing after spectacular
Right.
thing. And he's directed how many episodes of The Mandalorian has he done? 2?
2, I believe. I think he did 1 each season. That's pretty much how they've been splitting The Mandalorian, where everybody pretty much gets like an episode.
And those have been good. He's obviously directing a Star Wars movie.
Right.
So if you're sick of this guy, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, sorry.
Soon. So yeah, that's gonna do it for us. Our non-spoiler review of Thor. You can look forward to that soon, probably sometime Sunday, and then Thor: Love and Thunder full review on Wednesday, per usual. On that note, we are gonna get out of here. You can follow us on Twitter at ProjectINF_pod. You can follow us on Facebook, on Instagram
At the Project Infinite Pod.
Thank you, and look forward to Thor episode, was it 51? Will be Love and Thunder review?
51.
Yeah, 51. Episode 51. Until then, we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Peace.